pair kangaroo of Viavi Solutions to talk about a little bit of a different side of things.
Thank you very much, Kelly. So yes, we can jump straight into it on the next slide, please. So in this session here, we will discuss a little bit about the many facets and how those present slightly different value propositions around the disaggregation journey. And I say journey because it's in many cases a journey taking you through both a lot of hope and expectations, reality and grounding of what's really there and what is realistic, and then up again in generating the value that you can from this evolution in the industry. So we will really first validate and look at how we can get things to work. And this will really look at any scenario, any type of node, any type of load. And obviously, as we know, this needs to be done as outlined before in an automated fashion with full integration with CI/CD and CT. Once that is done, it presents itself in a new sort of fashion, which is around how do you assure something that is now disaggregated? Because this is not just the same as what you've done before, but in a slightly different twist. Because you have to take care of that disaggregation in a very specific way. And we'll look at a couple of examples of that, but it's really down to that it brings a set of complexity that is in many cases difficult for a human to manage. And there is a need to bring in some AIOps capability to drive both the visibility and actionability, and that allows you to drive automation. And then maybe the more important aspect or the last part here, which is once you now have a disaggregated solution set, not only on the network equipment side and the moving from PNFs to CNFs, but in the wider ecosystem, what does the disaggregation means in how you can now deliver new capabilities, new suites of capabilities? And these are often automated, often API driven, and we will look at a couple of different examples of how we can reduce some truck rolls and some manual labor in that, and we'll look at that as an example of something delivered. But let's go and see if we can make this work first, and let's go to the next slide, Kelly, please. So first of all, disaggregation is often connected to the cloud journey, but it's not always the case. But if we assume that the disaggregation is using cloud in this case, then there is as well a question on what cloud, where, and how. And then you need to consider openness or as well lock-in. So as you're going to disaggregated world, you're needing to look at a number of things and a number of places. Places both in means of that when you now have disaggregated components, how and where do you want to place them? What do you want to place on your own cloud, on your edge locations, on a public cloud, etc., etc. And this then comes down to the question of what is the true openness of something like an Open RAN or own RAN ecosystem? Are you easily able to mix and match any components in any aspects? Well, there's a lot of discussion around that, and there's a lot of opinions. But in the end of the day, if you don't test it and if you don't evaluate it, you don't know. Then you might have an opinion, but if you want facts, you really need to understand it. You need to do both the single node wraparound testing, you need to do the end-to-end testing, and then obviously, even if you get something to work in the basic integration scenario, you need to keep it integrated, and you need to keep your ability to continuously delivering this in an automated fashion. So this is really where we talk about this evolution from your initial validation of basic capabilities on a single vendor point of view, and whether you can wrap around it and see that it performs what it should do, in order to be able to stitch together multiple vendors with multiple disaggregated components into a single end-to-end system, and making sure that that system delivers according to expectations. And once you've done that, you can automate it. Let's now jump to the next slide. So from a Viavi point of view, we look at this as you need to be able to have access and capability to look at any interface, any point, and do any type of testing, wraparound or end-to-end. And as you're able to do that, you're able to build this factual understanding of what is possible and what is working, and then being able to move that forward. Let's jump immediately to the next slide. Because there's in the Open RAN and O-RAN ecosystem, I think we all heard about the RIC modeling, and that the RIC is delivering capabilities to have openness for applications, bringing together the sort of CSON type of applications and moving them into a more disaggregated environment possible to run inside the RIC. And once you want to do that, you need to be able to test and validate that those apps perform according to expectations. So one of the things which we're looking at there is very clearly on how do you build the right models so that what you're testing inside that RIC app, the R app or the X app, that should be able to do maybe some automated PCI collision validation or energy efficiency or so on, that you're able to test and validate the right scenarios. This is a quite complex type of modeling activity, and doing this right allows you to develop these apps so that they are working not only in one RIC, but in multiple RICs between different vendors, and then being able to control these things. So in a true disaggregated manner, we are helping all of these R app and X app vendors test and develop these applications using very realistic traffic models and run models. And this is very, very critical, and it's very essential to get to the ability to drive these new type of R apps and X apps in the disaggregated world. But if you assume that we're able to get this to work, let's now jump into the next slide, Kelly. So once we've been able to make it work, then we need to be able to operate it. And this is the assurance of that disaggregated world. And if remember as well that I said that we are often connecting this to the cloudification and the cloud journey, we're often seeing that this disaggregation practically means that we take a large PNF, which has historically been there, a monolithic delivery from one vendor, and then we break it into microservices. And so we move the PNF into CNF, and that CNF is then decomposed into multiple microservices that is basically building up this capability. If we trust that this works, then we will be able to achieve horizontal and vertical scalability in a very good way. But this takes a new set of trust into the system that you have to build. And this is a very similar logical transition as some of us who've been in the industry for a while have gone through when we moved from an ATM or PDH or SDH or SONET world into Ethernet with TCP/IP, and where we started to trust that Ethernet is going to reliably take care of certain aspects, TCP is going to take care of the secure delivery, and IP is actually going to make the packet work from point A to point B. And once we started to trust that, we could get extremely good efficiency out of that. Similarly, in this cloud, in cloudified and disaggregated world, we have to start trusting some of these underlying principles to work. If we do that and we can drive assurance around it, it's really fascinating what efficiency gains it can give us. But let's look at a practical example. So let's go to the next slide. So this is just to illustrate, we're taking a simple PCRF in this case, and we're taking the PCRF and looking at it. And this is obviously from just one vendor, but in this vendor, we have a PCRF that has been disaggregated into a bunch of microservices. So we see in the middle, the PCRF as it is instantiated from a logical network function point of view. And then we see the microservice it basically disaggregates into. And each of these microservices obviously have its own performance and its own reliability and its own footprint that it basically needs to have to operate. And therefore, in order to do the assurance of this, if you only look at it from the logical network function point of view from the PCRF, you're actually missing a significant portion of what it takes to drive assurance in this cloudified and disaggregated ecosystem. And to make things a little bit worse, let's look at the next slide. All of these functions then basically get instantiated in the Kubernetes cluster into different working nodes on the, in this case, AWS cluster or AWS compute environment. And in this environment, you obviously need to look at the topological relationship between the different nodes, how they communicate and how they have interdependencies. And from that, you need to drive the right level of understanding of how do I trust that this scalability is going to work in a good way, etc. And if you don't figure this out, then you're going to have significant issues. So let's take a look at the next step. So the next step is something I and many other people, and let's go to the next slide, please. So in the next step of the industry here, what we've been looking at is, and I've been part of the Etsy CSM work for some time here, a couple of years. And as part of this work, we've been looking at how do we take a end-to-end service management view of how do we drive towards zero-touch operations. And as part of this Etsy work, we have defined a reference architecture, which you can easily go and look up on the Etsy website. And this then helps us to design a disaggregated, a complete zero-touch operations platform using multiple domains which are disaggregated in how they are doing various aspects of the service management and the insurance. But it really allows us to then use the best of breed capabilities in each of these functions. And you can have here in this a very strong openness in how you build this from either single vendor components or from other components of basically open source or third-party components, etc. So this is a very important evolution of how you move towards complete operations of disaggregated networks. And let's quickly now jump into one example of how we from Viavi have taken disaggregation and applied it into a use case with one of our customers. So go to the next slide, please, Kelly. So in this case, we took a traditional use case where you normally send a field technician together with some sort of test equipment, and that is able to address, in this case, trouble tickets in fiber to the home rollouts. And as some of you know, that is a substantial amount of basically truck rolls happening on a weekly basis across large countries. And for one European country, the outcome of what I'm going to speak about here gives us a savings of 5,000 truck rolls on a weekly basis. So what we did is that we took the concepts of disaggregation, applied it into our own industry, which is test and measurement, and we disaggregated what was traditionally one of these instruments into a hardware component that is fitting into a smart SFP that you can plug into any switch port. And then we have a disaggregated software component that can run in a automated fashion. So what we're now done is that we've done the integration between these two components into the relevant OSS system in this operator. And this is now allowing us to take a trouble ticket from one of the wholesale partners and basically automatically test and validate whether there is an actual trouble on the fiber to the home link. And if so, identify what is the type of problem, and then dispatch the service technician to actually go and fix that, rather than to just go out and validate if there is a problem. So practically speaking, this has been saving a significant amount of truck rolls, and obviously a truck roll costs a lot of diesel and it costs a lot of other energy. So this has practically done a significant amount of energy reduction, which you can achieve through this. So this is an example of how we translate disaggregation into our own industry, disaggregate our own capabilities to provide revolutionary new use cases. And let's move on to the conclusion here, into the next slide here. So with this, I just want to say that the disaggregation creates a ton of value in many ways, but it introduces a set of risks, and the risk is around whether certain vendors are able to interoperate with other vendors, or whether you're able to maintain an integration between multiple vendors over time. And if so, how are you able to automate that and manage that? And these are, in many cases, potentially not very well understood behaviors that you need to manage. And therefore, you need facts, you need to have real data that you can work with. And it really puts new requirements across all parts of the organization. So the sourcing teams needs to know and understand these challenges. They need to use new methodologies to, for example, validate these components early on in a supply chain process from a technical merit, rather than maybe doing a paper process early on and then leaving a POC until the last moment before a contract is awarded. We need in the same way to have labs evolving from predominantly using heavy iron testing in the past into much more software-driven factories. Similar with operations, we need to have operations transitioning into a sort of overall AI ops model and being able to employ those type of capabilities. And as well, the overall service design. So when you are now building a new network or even looking at an existing network, are there things you can actually revisit, which will allow you to save significant resources as you are able to disaggregate and automate. And Viavi believes strongly that we are the only vendor that can provide all of this value across the full life cycle, from lab into the live into assurance, and for any technology and any cloud and any vendor across this. So thanks for that opportunity, Kelly. And then I look forward to the next steps of this discussion.